The clock in Victor Sterling's kitchen read 9:04 in the evening when hunger finally broke a 10-year-old girl's silence. Emma Carter pressed her small body flat against the humming steel of the industrial refrigerator, her back cold through the thin fabric of her worn pink shirt. She counted to 60 in her head, lips moving without sound, the way her mother had taught her. 1, 2, 3. The numbers were a lifeline in the dark. 4, 5, 6. Each count was a prayer that the heavy footsteps echoing through the marble hallways would fade into nothing. The kitchen of the Sterling mansion was a cathedral of chrome and granite, a room so vast that Emma's entire apartment could have fit inside it 3 times over with space left for the narrow alley where she caught the bus each morning. Copper pots hung from iron hooks like sleeping bells. The black countertops gleamed even in the dim light of the single bulb Mrs. Thornfield always left burning over the service entrance. Emma knew every shadow in this room. She had mapped them out night after night for the past 6 weeks, memorizing the safe paths between the pantry and the industrial stove, between the butcher block island and the steel cart where hope sometimes lived in the form of forgotten food. Her stomach twisted with a familiar hollow ache, sharp and insistent. She pressed one hand against it, fingers splayed, trying to quiet the noise her body made. The other hand clutched something else, something that had been her companion through every hungry night. Deep in the pocket of her faded jeans, her fingers curled around a small bronze pin, its edges worn smooth by decades of careful hands before hers. The metal was warm from her body heat, and she squeezed it now like a talisman. 58, 59, 60. The footsteps were gone. Emma exhaled slowly through her nose and peeled herself away from the refrigerator. Her bare feet made no sound on the polished stone floor as she moved past the 6-burner commercial stove that could have cooked meals for a restaurant. She slipped around the massive butcher block island where Mrs. Thornfield prepared the elaborate dinners that Mr. Sterling ate alone each night. Her target stood against the far wall near the service entrance, a rolling steel cart that held the boundary between abundance and waste. Mrs. Thornfield ran the Sterling household with the precision of a general and the mercy of a hanging judge. Every rule was absolute, every deviation punished. The head housekeeper had made it clear to all the staff that leftover food from Mr. Sterling's solitary dinners was to be scraped into the compost bin at exactly 9:15 each evening. But the kitchen staff, good people with soft hearts, often forgot. They would leave half a sandwich on a plate, or a few roasted potatoes still glistening with olive oil, or the heel of fresh bread wrapped loosely in foil. They would leave it on the cart for an hour, just in case Mr. Sterling wanted a late-night snack. He never did. Emma knew this the way she knew her mother's cough, the sound of it rattling through their thin apartment walls at 3 in the morning. She knew it the way she knew the exact weight of hunger in her belly, the difference between missing 1 meal and missing 3. Tonight the cart held a small ceramic bowl covered with a square of aluminum foil. Emma's hands trembled as she reached for it. The bowl was light. She lifted the foil with fingers that shook from more than cold. Macaroni and cheese. The pasta gleamed orange and yellow under the weak light, barely touched, still holding the ghost of warmth. Emma's eyes filled with tears so quickly she had to blink them away. She loved macaroni and cheese. It had been her favorite meal before her mother got sick, before the hospital bills started arriving in red envelopes, before dinner became a single slice of bread divided carefully into 6 bites to make it last longer. Beside the bowl sat 2 dinner rolls, hard as river stones, but still edible if she could find a way to soften them. Her mother would know what to do. Her mother always knew, but her mother was upstairs now on the 3rd floor, turning down the heavy blankets in 20 guest bedrooms that no one ever used, her thin body moving through the endless work while her damaged lungs struggled with every breath. Emma picked up the bowl with both hands. It was cold now, the cheese congealed into a rubbery mass, but she did not care. She was raising the first bite to her at the mouth, pasta balanced on her fingertips, when a shadow fell across the cart. The overhead lights blazed to life with a click that sounded like breaking bones. The bowl slipped from Emma's numb fingers and shattered against the white tile floor. Yellow-orange pasta exploded outward in a starburst pattern. Cheese sauce splattered across her worn sneakers and up the legs of her jeans. The crash echoed through the vast kitchen like a gunshot. A man stood in the doorway. He was tall, dressed not in the suit she had seen him wear during her mother's brief orientation 6 months ago, but in a dark blue bathrobe that looked soft and expensive. His hair was thick and silver, combed back from a face that might have been handsome once before grief carved lines into it. Even shadowed by exhaustion, his eyes were sharp, the pale gray of winter sky Monday. This was Victor Sterling, the man who owned the house, the man who owned the company her mother worked for, the man her mother had warned her, with hands gripping Emma's shoulders, must never ever be disturbed. Emma's heart hammered against her ribs so hard she thought they might crack. Her throat closed. She could not breathe. She could not move. She was caught. For a long moment, Victor Sterling simply stared. His mind seemed to struggle with what his eyes were telling him. He had lived in this house for 40 years. It had been built when his company first made its fortune, designed by architects whose names appeared in magazines, furnished by his late wife Eleanor, who had possessed the kind of taste that turned money into beauty. After she died, the house had become something else. Not a home, a museum of his life, a vast silent place where he walked through rooms that echoed with the ghost of her laughter, where he ate dinners prepared by people he barely knew, where he slept badly in a bed too large for one person. Tonight the silence had been worse than usual. Sleep was a battle Victor rarely won anymore. His doctor had given him pills, but they only made the darkness heavier without bringing rest. He had been in his study, the wood-paneled room lined with books he no longer read, staring at the framed photograph of Eleanor on his desk. She smiled out at him from 10 years in the past, forever frozen at 58, forever untouched by the cancer that had hollowed her out in 6 terrible months. He missed her. God, he missed her. The ache was a physical thing, a weight in his chest that never lifted. In the years since her death, he had let the house run itself, let Mrs. Thornfield handle everything while he sat in his study and pretended to work. His son Robert had tried to stay, had wanted to help, but Victor had pushed him away with the same cold efficiency he used in board meetings. He did not need pity. He did not need help. He needed to be left alone with his grief. But tonight, something had changed. Tonight, the silence felt different, louder, more accusing. He had decided to do something he had not done in years. He would go to the kitchen himself. He would make a cup of hot milk the way his mother had made it for him when he was a boy, with honey and a pinch of cinnamon. It was a small act of rebellion against the emptiness, a tiny human gesture in a house that had forgotten what human meant. He had walked down the curved staircase, his leather slippers silent on the plush carpet runner. He had passed the grand ballroom where Eleanor used to host charity events, dark now and smelling faintly of furniture polish. He had passed the formal dining room where the table was set for 12 every day, though no one ever ate there. When he pushed open the heavy door to the kitchen wing, he had expected darkness. Instead, he saw a shape, small, human, a child. A little girl with pale blonde hair was hunched over the catering cart, her narrow shoulders curved in a posture of desperate secrecy. For a single heartbeat, Victor thought he was dreaming. Maybe this was a ghost, a memory of his granddaughter visiting from California, though that had been 2 years ago and she rarely came anymore. Then the child dropped something and the sound of shattering ceramic shattered the possibility of dreams. The girl fell to her knees and began frantically scooping the spilled macaroni back into the broken bowl with her bare hands, cheese sauce coating her fingers. She was crying, tears streaming down her face but making no sound except for the small, desperate whimpers of an animal in a trap. "I'm sorry," she whispered. The words tore from her throat like something jagged. "I'll clean it. I'll clean it right now. Please, please don't tell Mrs. Thornfield. Please, sir." Victor watched her, rooted in place. He was not angry. That would have been simpler. He was confused. The girl was shaking so hard her hands could barely grip the pasta. She was not looking at him. She was looking at the mess, her small back heaving with silent sobs that shook her whole body. He noticed her clothes then. They were clean but worn, the pink shirt faded from many washings, the jeans thin at the knees. Her sneakers had holes in the toes, the white canvas splitting away from the rubber soles. She was thin, not just slender, thin. Her wrists were like bird bones. Her cheeks were hollow. This was not his granddaughter. His granddaughter had rooms full of toys and a stable full of ponies she rode on weekends. This child looked like hunger wore a face. "Stop," Victor said. His voice came out rougher than he intended, gravelly from disuse. He cleared his throat and tried again, softer this time, but still carrying the weight of authority he had learned in 50 years of boardrooms. Stop. Put that down. Emma froze, her hands full of cold pasta and broken ceramic. Slowly she looked up. Her face was streaked with tears and a small smear of cheese sauce. Her eyes were huge and blue and terrified. Who are you? Victor asked. She swallowed hard. I'm Emma, sir. Emma Carter. Carter. The name stirred something in Victor's memory. He employed 42 people to maintain his house and grounds. He nodded to them when he passed them in the halls, but he could not have told you most of their names. Mrs. Thornfield handled all of that. She hired, she fired, she managed. She was efficient. That was all Victor required. But Carter, Grace Carter, yes. The quiet woman with sad eyes who polished the silver in the library every Thursday. Mrs. Thornfield had praised her work ethic once, which was rare. The head housekeeper did not give compliments easily. Your mother is Grace Carter? Victor asked. Yes, sir, Emma whispered. Where is she? She's working. Upstairs. She's working very hard. She told me to stay in the staff lounge. She said to be quiet and not touch anything. The staff lounge is in the basement, Victor said. His mind was sharp despite the late hour, despite the pills he had swallowed an hour ago, on the other side of the house. You are not in the staff lounge. Emma flinched as if he had struck her. I was hungry. The words hung in the air between them, simple and terrible. Victor Sterling had negotiated billion-dollar mergers. He had faced down hostile boards and aggressive competitors. He had stood beside his wife's hospital bed and watched her die by inches. He had buried his parents and later his wife in parts of himself he could not name. But in 68 years of life, he had never had a child stand in his kitchen and tell him she was hungry. I see, he said slowly. He looked at the bowl in her hands, at the broken pieces, at the smears of orange cheese sauce on the floor. He looked at the cart behind her, at the 2 bread rolls, hard as stones. His eyes moved to the industrial refrigerator that held enough food to feed 20 people, to the walk-in pantry stocked with provisions that would last for months. This is what you were eating? He asked. The leftovers? Emma nodded miserably. They were going to be thrown away, sir. Mrs. Thornfield throws it all away at 9:15. I wasn't stealing, I was just waiting for the garbage. She gulped air like she was drowning. Please, Mr. Sterling, my mama, she needs this job. She's sick, Emma clamped her mouth shut so fast her teeth clicked. She had said too much. Her mother's first rule, repeated every morning before they left their apartment, was crystal clear. Never talk about our problems. We are fine. We are grateful. We do not complain. She's sick, Victor repeated softly. It was not a question. But Emma had retreated into herself, folding inward like a flower at dusk. She knelt in the puddle of spilled food, her hands still full of cold pasta, and said nothing. Her eyes were fixed on the floor. She had become a small statue of shame. Before Victor could speak again, before he could find words for the strange, tight feeling in his chest, a new voice cut through the kitchen like a blade. What is the meaning of this? Mrs. Thornfield stood in the opposite doorway, the one that led from the main hallway. She was a tall woman, spare and severe, dressed in the crisp black uniform she wore like armor. Her gray hair was pulled back into a bun so tight it seemed to stretch her face into a permanent expression of disapproval. She carried a large black trash bag in one hand, prepared for her nightly ritual of disposing of the day's waste. Her eyes took in the scene instantly. Mr. Sterling in his bathrobe, looking disturbed. The girl on her knees surrounded by broken pottery and spilled food. Those sharp eyes missed nothing. Her face, normally the color of old paper, turned a dark blotchy red. You, she said, pointing one long finger at Emma, like she was identifying a rat. I knew it. Emma scrambled to her feet and backed away until she hit the refrigerator, pressing herself against the cold steel as if she could disappear into it. Mrs. Thornfield, Victor said. His voice was low, controlled, but there was something new in it, a warning. Mr. Sterling, I am so deeply sorry you had to witness this, the housekeeper said. Her voice shook with barely contained rage. I have suspected for weeks that food was going missing. I thought it was one of the night porters, but it was her. She advanced on Emma. You filthy little thief, stealing from the hand that feeds your mother. I will have you both out of here tonight. I will call the police and Mrs. Thornfield, that is enough. The word cracked through the kitchen like a whip. Victor had not raised his voice, but the tone carried absolute authority. It was the voice he used when firing executives, when closing deals, when there was no room for negotiation. Sir, she has broken every rule. She is trespassing in the main kitchen. She is stealing your... She is a child, Victor said. Each word was flat and cold as river stones. She is a thief, Mrs. Thornfield countered. Her mother, Grace Carter, bringing her here, letting her run wild in your home. It is a complete disgrace. I will fetch Grace now. She can pack her things and you will do no such thing. Mrs. Thornfield stopped mid-stride. She had worked for Victor Sterling for 10 years. In all that time, she had run his household with an iron hand. He had never questioned her. He had never contradicted her. He had signed every check she put in front of him, approved every decision, trusted her completely. She was efficient. She was thorough. She kept the great machine of his life running smoothly while he hid in his study and grieved. But something had changed in his voice, something cold and immovable. Sir, she began again, I am simply trying to maintain standards. The mess, the rules, they must be... The mess can be cleaned, Victor said. His eyes never left Emma's pale, terrified face. The rules can wait. Leave us, now. Mrs. Thornfield looked as if she had been slapped. Her mouth opened and closed twice without sound. She clutched the trash bag to her chest like a shield. For a long moment, she simply stared at him, and Victor saw something flicker in her eyes. Not just anger, something deeper, something that looked almost like fear. Then she turned on her heel and marched out of the kitchen, her rigid back broadcasting outrage with every step. The door swung shut behind her with a soft click that sounded like the cocking of a gun. The kitchen fell silent again, except for the steady hum of the refrigerator and the small, ragged sound of Emma trying not to cry. Victor let out a breath he had not known he was holding. He looked at the girl, at the mess on the floor, at the broken bowl and scattered pasta. Well, he said quietly, I suppose we should clean this up. He walked to the industrial sink and pulled a clean cloth from the hook beside it. He ran it under warm water and wrung it out. Then he did something he had not done in perhaps 20 years. He walked back to the spill and lowered himself to his knees on the cold tile floor. His joints popped audibly. His back protested. But he knelt there on the floor of his own kitchen, a 68-year-old billionaire in a bathrobe, and began wiping up cold cheese sauce. Emma stared at him as if he had sprouted wings. Sir, no, she gasped. I'll do it. It's my fault. We'll do it together, Victor said simply. He glanced up at her. Go on. Get the pieces. Carefully. Don't cut yourself. Hesitantly, moving like someone approaching a wild animal, Emma knelt beside him. Together they worked in silence, the old man and the child, picking up shards of ceramic and wiping sauce from the tile. Victor found himself studying her in his peripheral vision, the thinness of her wrists, the careful, precise way she handled each piece of broken bowl, the fact that even now, even in her fear and shame, she was trying to be helpful. As she reached for a particularly large shard, her sleeve pulled back. Victor saw her wrist more clearly, saw the delicate bones, saw also that her other hand, the one not picking up pottery, was clenched into a tight fist around something in her pocket. What is that? He asked gently. In your hand? Emma quickly pulled her arm back, tucking her fist against her stomach. It's nothing, sir. Just my lucky charm. May I see it? She hesitated. Her mother's voice was loud in her head. Don't bother, Mr. Sterling. Don't speak unless spoken to. Keep your head down. Be invisible. But he was asking. He was kneeling on his own kitchen floor, cleaning up her mess, and he was asking to see her lucky charm. Slowly, Emma uncurled her fingers. It was not a button or a coin. It was a pin. Old, worn, bronze that had oxidized to a deep brown-green patina. An eagle with wings spread wide, talons clutching a small American flag. It was a military service pin, the kind given to the families of soldiers. Victor leaned closer, his heart suddenly beating faster. He recognized this design. His own father had one packed away in a box somewhere in the attic. though Victor had not looked at it in 30 years. "Where did you get this?" he asked. His voice had gone quiet, but there was a new intensity in it. "It was my great-great-uncle's," Emma whispered. "My mama's uncle. He was a soldier, a long time ago." "A soldier," Victor repeated. He reached out slowly, and Emma let him take the pin from her palm. It was surprisingly heavy for its size. He turned it over, looking for markings. On the back, barely visible through the tarnish, were engraved letters, DSC, Distinguished Service Cross, and a name, Sullivan. "What was his name?" Victor asked. "Your great-great-uncle?" "Lieutenant James Sullivan," Emma said. Her voice was soft but steady now, reciting words she had heard her mother speak 100 times. "He was a paratrooper. In the war. The big one. World War II." Victor's breath caught in his throat. He had studied history in college. He had read books about the war. He had funded memorials and museums. But he had never held a piece of it in his hand like this, warm from a child's pocket. "Tell me about him," he said. Emma looked uncertain, but there was something in Mr. Sterling's face, something that did not look like anger or impatience. He looked interested. Actually interested. "He jumped out of airplanes," Emma began. "Mama says it was very brave. He was with the 101st Airborne. They went to France, to a place called Normandy." "D-Day," Victor murmured. "Yes, sir." Emma's eyes lit up a little, the fear receding as she told the story she loved. "He jumped with his whole team, and there was a big fight near a town called Quarantine," Victor supplied. "Yes," Emma nodded. "They got trapped," Mama said. "The enemy was in a big house, and Lieutenant James, he made a distraction. He ran out so the bad guys would look at him instead of his friends. He kept running and shooting so everyone else could get away. He drew their fire," Victor said quietly. Emma nodded again. "They shot him 7 times, but he kept going. He saved everyone. All his friends lived because of him." "And him?" Victor asked, though he already knew the answer. "He died," Emma said simply. "But Mama says he was a hero. They gave this pin to my great-great-grandma. She gave it to Mama, and Mama gave it to me." She touched the pin in Victor's hand with one small finger. She said, "This is who we are." She said, "We don't run away. We help people. That's what heroes do." The words settled into the quiet kitchen like snow. Victor stared at the bronze eagle, at the worn edges, at the flag clutched in those tiny talons. A paratrooper who gave his life to save his squad. A hero whose legacy was a 10-year-old girl hiding in a kitchen, starving in secret, clutching this pin like it could save her too. The silence stretched. It was no longer empty. It was full of Emma's words, full of the weight of sacrifice made 70 years ago in a French village, full of questions Victor did not yet know how to ask. "Mr. Sterling?" A new voice, sharp with panic, shattered the moment. Grace Carter stood in the doorway where Mrs. Thornfield had stood minutes before. She was thin like her daughter, her light brown hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, a few strands escaping to stick to her damp forehead. Her maid's uniform was rumpled, the black fabric showing sweat stains under the arms. Her face was pale, almost gray, and her eyes were ringed with exhaustion so deep it looked like bruising. When she saw Emma kneeling on the floor with Victor Sterling, when she saw the broken bowl and the spilled food, her face crumpled. "Oh, Emma," she whispered. "What did you do?" "Grace," Victor said, standing up. His knees protested loudly. He was a tall man, and standing made him tower over both the woman and child. "Sir, I am so terribly sorry." Grace's words tumbled over each other in her panic. "She knows the rules. She knows she is to stay in the lounge. I had to wax the floors in the East Wing, and I was so tired. I told her to read her book." "Sir, please don't fire me. Please. I will pay for whatever she ate. I'll work for free. I'll work double shifts. Please, sir. My daughter needs—" "Grace." Victor's voice was not loud, but it cut through her panic like a hand reaching through water to pull her to the surface. She stopped mid-word, tears streaming down her face. "Emma has been explaining the situation to me," Victor said carefully. Grace's face went white as bone. "What situation?" "The hospital bills, the letters, your lungs." For a moment, Grace looked like she might faint. She grabbed the door frame to steady herself, her knuckles going white with the force of her grip. Sir, that is my personal business. It is not, I would never dream of burdening you with. You work for me, Victor interrupted. You work in my home. Your daughter is hiding in my kitchen, eating garbage because she is hungry. I believe that makes it my concern. Grace's legs seemed to give out. She slid down the door frame until she was sitting on the floor, her back against the wood, her hands covering her face. The sobs that came from her were raw and terrible, the sound of someone who had been holding back an ocean with bare hands and finally could not anymore. Mama. Emma scrambled across the floor and wrapped her arms around her mother, burying her face in Grace's neck. I'm sorry, Mama. I was so hungry and I told him about Uncle James and I. Oh, sweetheart, Grace choked out, pulling Emma close. Her hand stroked her daughter's hair, with automatic tenderness even as she wept. Oh, my baby girl. Victor stood over them, this tableau of grief and hunger playing out on his kitchen floor, and felt something crack open in his chest, something that had been frozen for 10 years. He turned and walked to the wall-mounted telephone, the internal line that connected to various parts of the house and to his most trusted people outside it. He picked up the receiver and dialed a number from memory. It rang once. Hello? A groggy male voice answered. David, Victor said. It's Victor Sterling. Wake up. I need you now. There was a pause, the sound of sheets rustling. David Thorne had been Victor's personal attorney for 20 years. He had handled Eleanor's will. He had managed the trust funds for Robert. He was used to late-night calls, but not like this. Sir, it's almost 10:30 at night, David said, trying to sound alert. I am aware of the time, Victor replied. His voice was calm but held an edge of steel. I am in my kitchen with one of my employees and her daughter. The daughter, by the way, is the great-great-niece of a decorated paratrooper who died at Normandy. And her mother is being harassed by a hospital for medical bills she cannot pay. Another pause. Harassed, sir? Red letters, threats to stop treatment. The usual tactics. I want you to find out which hospital. I want you to call them tonight. I don't care what time it is. I want you to pay the bill. All of it. And I want Grace Carter to see Dr. Benjamin Cole at Sterling Medical Clinic tomorrow morning at 9:30. The best pulmonary specialist we have. Bill everything to my personal account. In the doorway, Grace had lifted her head. She was shaking it back and forth, her face stricken with disbelief and something close to horror. Sir? No, she said. Her voice was hoarse. I cannot accept that. It's charity. It's too much. I can't. Victor held up one hand, a gesture that said wait, and kept the phone pressed to his ear with the other. David, are you writing this down? Yes, sir, the lawyer said. His voice was wide awake now. Consider it handled. What hospital? Victor looked at Grace. What hospital? St. Mary's, Grace whispered. St. Mary's Medical Center, Victor repeated into the phone. Find out the balance. Pay it tonight. And David, make sure Dr. Cole knows this is priority. She sees him first thing tomorrow. Understood, sir. Anything else? Victor thought for a moment. Yes. Pull the last 10 years of household financial records. All vendors, all contracts. I want a full audit of expenses. Start with food and linens. Sir, may I ask? No, Victor said. Not yet. Just do it. I'll explain tomorrow. He hung up the phone and turned back to face Grace and Emma. The woman was shaking her head, tears still streaming, her mouth working, but no sound coming out. Ma'am, Victor said, and his voice softened in a way it had not softened in years. Your great-uncle ran into enemy fire to save his men. You ran into a burning building to save people you barely knew. It seems to me your family has a habit of helping others. Now please, for once, be quiet and let someone help you. The words settled over Grace like a blanket. She stared up at him, this tall, silver-haired man in his expensive bathrobe, this stranger who somehow knew about the fire, who somehow cared, and she could not speak, could not argue, could only cry and hold her daughter. Now, Victor continued, his tone becoming businesslike. The sleeping arrangements. You cannot go back to your apartment tonight, not with an appointment at the clinic in the morning. And Emma is exhausted. He looked at the little girl, who was indeed swaying slightly on her feet now that the adrenaline was fading. Mrs. Thornfield keeps 20 guest rooms on the 3rd floor in a state of constant readiness, Victor said, Tonight, you and Emma will be my guests. Sir, we can't, Grace protested weakly. The staff, Mrs. Thornfield will... Mrs. Thornfield, Victor said, and something cold flickered in his eyes. Works for me. I believe I am allowed to have guests in my own home. Especially, he added, his gaze moving to the bronze pin still in his hand. The family of a hero. He held the pin out to Emma, who took it carefully and clutched it against her heart. Come, Victor said, gesturing toward the door. I will show you to your room. We will use the main staircase. The main staircase. Grace felt the words like a physical blow. Staff did not use the main staircase. Staff used the narrow back stairs, the servants' passages designed to keep them invisible. She opened her mouth to protest, but Victor was already walking toward the grand hallway, and Emma was tugging at her hand. Come on, Mama, Emma whispered. Grace rose on shaking legs and followed. The hallway was different at night. The grand portraits of sterling ancestors stared down at them from gilded frames, their painted eyes seeming to track the strange procession. The carpet was so thick and soft that Emma's feet sank into it with each step. She wanted to take off her holy sneakers. It felt wrong to walk on something so beautiful. The main staircase was a sweeping curve of dark polished wood, wide enough for 6 people to walk abreast. A crystal chandelier hung 2 stories above them, dark now but still magnificent. Victor climbed the stairs with steady steps, and Grace followed with Emma's hand gripped tight in hers. On the second-floor landing, a figure emerged from the shadows like a ghost. Mrs. Thornfield stood with her hands clasped in front of her spine straight as a rod. She was no longer red-faced and angry. Now she was pale, composed, and cold as winter. Her eyes were not on Victor. They were fixed on Grace with a look of such pure venom that Grace felt it like acid on her skin. Mr. Sterling, Mrs. Thornfield said. Her voice was quiet but edged like a knife. It is very late. I was simply completing my rounds. As was I, Victor said easily. Thank you, Mrs. Thornfield. You may go to bed. The housekeeper did not move. Her eyes slid to Emma, who was half hidden behind her mother's legs. What are you doing, sir? She asked. With them. The word them hung in the air like poison. I am showing my guests to their room, Victor said. His voice remained pleasant, but there was steel underneath. The blue room, I think. It has a nice view of the gardens. Mrs. Thornfield's mask of control cracked for just an instant. A small, sharp breath escaped her. Guests, she repeated. Sir, she is a maid. And the child is the great-great-niece of Lieutenant James Sullivan, Victor interrupted. His voice was still quiet, but it cut like a razor. 101st Airborne. Distinguished Service Cross. Killed in action at Normandy, saving his entire squad. Mrs. Thornfield's mouth opened slightly. This woman, Victor continued, nodding toward Grace, ran into a burning building to save 6 people at risk of her own life. Her lungs were permanently damaged. And you, Mrs. Thornfield, wanted to call the police on her daughter for eating leftovers that were destined for the garbage. He took 1 step closer to the housekeeper. He was several inches taller, and he used the height now. I find that unacceptable, he said softly. Do you? Mrs. Thornfield's face had gone from pale to ashen. She was a woman who valued control above all things, who had built her authority on an intricate network of rules and hierarchies. And in one night, the man she had worked for, the man who had never questioned her, had torn it all down. No, sir, she whispered. Good, Victor said. Now. Grace and Emma are my personal guests. They will stay in the blue room. I trust you will ensure they have everything they need. Fresh toiletries, clean clothes, breakfast in the morning. Yes, sir, Mrs. Thornfield said. The words tasted like ashes. Excellent. Good night, Mrs. Thornfield. Victor turned his back on her. It was a dismissal more complete than words could have been. He walked to the end of the hallway and opened a white-paneled door. Emma, Grace, in here, please. Grace moved past Mrs. Thornfield, feeling the woman's hatred radiating like heat from a furnace. Emma pressed close to her mother's side. They slipped through the door, and Victor followed, closing it firmly behind them. The room was beautiful beyond anything Emma had ever seen. The walls were painted a soft sky blue. A massive bed dominated the center, piled high with white pillows and a thick down comforter that looked like a cloud. A crystal lamp glowed softly on the bedside table. On the far side of the room was a small velvet sofa and a fireplace with a white marble mantel. French doors opened onto a small balcony that overlooked the gardens. Emma let go of her mother's hand and walked slowly toward the bed, as if in a trance. She reached out one small finger and touched the comforter. It was the softest thing she had ever felt in her life. "Mama," she breathed. "Look." Grace stood, frozen just inside the door, her hands wringing together. "Sir, Mr. Sterling, this is, this room is, this room is for guests," Victor said firmly. He crossed to a large closet and opened it. "My granddaughter keeps some clothes here from when she visits. They may be too large for Emma, but they will be warm. Pajamas are in the dresser. The bathroom is through that door." He gestured to another door on the far wall. Then he walked to the antique desk by the window and picked up the telephone receiver. "This phone will ring at 8 o'clock in the morning," he said, looking at Grace. "It will be my attorney, David. He will confirm your appointment time with Dr. Cole. My driver will take you there and bring you back." Grace was trying to process his words, but they felt like they were coming from very far away. "Doctor, driver, tomorrow morning." It was a different language. "Sir, how can I can never repay you for—" "You will not repay me," Victor said gently. "This is not a transaction, Grace. This is correcting an error. The great niece of a man like Lieutenant Sullivan should not be in medical debt. Not in my country, and certainly not in my house." He turned to Emma, who had climbed onto the edge of the bed and was bouncing slightly, testing the mattress with wonder in her eyes. "You," he said, and his voice was almost gruff. "Get some sleep. You look tired." Emma stopped bouncing and looked at him. Her face was still streaked with dried tears, her hair tangled, her clothes stained with cheese sauce. But her eyes were bright. "Thank you for the macaroni," she said softly. Victor felt that crack in his chest widen. Something warm and painful was seeping through. "You're welcome, Emma," he managed. "Good night." He walked to the door, his hand on the knob. Then he paused and looked back. "Grace," he said. Her red-rimmed eyes met his. "You are not alone anymore. Do you understand?" Grace could only nod, her throat too tight for words. Victor stepped out into the hallway and closed the door softly behind him. For a long moment, Grace and Emma stood in the beautiful blue room, not quite believing it was real. Then Emma ran to the bathroom, her voice echoing back. "Mama, come see, the bathtub is huge." Grace walked slowly to the bed and sat on its edge. She looked at her hands, rough and red from cleaning chemicals. She looked at the silk wallpaper. She had been so afraid of being fired, so terrified of losing the little they had. And now, in the space of one impossible hour, everything had changed. She did not know yet about Mrs. Thornfield's hatred, about the long game of revenge the housekeeper would play. She did not know about the battles still to come. Tonight she knew only this: her daughter was safe. Her medical bills were paid. Someone, for the first time in 4 terrible years, had seen them, had helped them. Grace buried her face in her hands and wept. But this time the tears were not only grief. They were relief. In his study, Victor sat in his leather chair with a glass of water in his hand, staring at the photograph of Eleanor. "You would have liked them," he said to her smiling face. "They have spirit, the kind this house has been missing." He thought of Emma's thin wrists, of Grace's exhausted eyes, of a bronze pin carried across decades, of a man named James Sullivan who had run toward danger so others could live. Then he thought of Mrs. Thornfield's face when he had defended Grace, the flash of fear under the anger, the way her hands had tightened. Something was wrong there. He felt it in his bones. Victor picked up his phone and dialed another number. It rang 3 times before a deep voice answered. "Sterling Residence Security. Thomas," Victor said. "It's Victor Sterling. I need you to look into something for me." Quietly, "Of course, sir." Thomas Grant had been Victor's head of security for 15 years. Ex-FBI. Thorough, discreet. "What do you need?" "Background check," Victor said. "Full financial workup. Personal history. One of my staff. Miss Margaret Thornfield, head housekeeper." There was a brief pause. "Any particular reason, sir?" "Call it instinct," Victor said. "Something about her reaction tonight. It was not just anger. It was fear. I want to know what she's afraid of. "I'll start first thing in the morning," Thomas said. "No," Victor corrected. "Start now." He hung up and turned to look out the window at the dark gardens, at the lights of the city beyond. 10 years he had spent in this house, a ghost haunting his own life. 10 years of silence and grief and emptiness. And tonight, a hungry child with a hero's pin had cracked the ice around his heart. Victor did not know what tomorrow would bring, did not know about the investigations that would uncover theft and lies, did not know about the confrontation that was coming, did not know that he was about to go to war in his own home. Tonight he knew only that he had done one right thing, one human thing, and it felt like waking up after a long, dark sleep. In the blue room, Emma finally put on the two large pajamas covered with pink flowers and climbed under the covers. Grace lay down on top of the blankets, still fully dressed, unable to quite believe she was allowed to sleep in this bed. Emma was asleep in seconds, her breathing deep and even, one hand still clutching the bronze pin. Grace watched her daughter sleep in the soft lamplight. For the first time in months, Emma's face was peaceful. Not pinched with hunger, not tight with worry, just a little girl sleeping safely. Grace thought of Lieutenant James Sullivan, a man she had never met, whose sacrifice had echoed down through generations. She thought of Mr. Sterling, the lonely billionaire who had knelt on his kitchen floor to help clean up a mess. She thought of the long, hard road ahead, the treatments and the work and the unknown. But tonight, in this moment, they were safe. They were warm. They were fed. Grace closed her eyes and for the first time in years, slept without fear. Outside the blue room, the Sterling mansion settled into the quiet hours of night. Lights dimmed, footsteps faded. The great house breathed with the rhythm of sleep. But in her own small room on the opposite wing, Mrs. Thornfield sat on the edge of her bed, fully dressed, her hands clenched into fists, her face white with fury. Everything she had built, everything she had carefully constructed over 10 years. One night, one stupid, hungry child, and it was all starting to unravel. She reached for her phone and typed a message with shaking fingers. "We have a problem. The old man is awake. What do we do now?" She hit send and waited, staring at the screen until a reply came back 3 minutes later. "Stay calm, stick to the plan. He suspects nothing. Yet." Mrs. Thornfield read the message twice, then deleted it. She turned off her phone and sat in the darkness, thinking, planning. The war had just begun, and she had no intention of losing. But she had made one critical mistake. She had underestimated the power of a bronze pin, the memory of sacrifice, the legacy of heroes. And most of all, she had underestimated what happens when a lonely man finds something worth fighting for. The clock in the kitchen, still keeping perfect time, clicked over to midnight. A new day had begun. Morning light filtered through the French doors of the blue room like liquid gold, painting stripes across the thick carpet and the massive bed where Emma Carter had slept better than she had in months. She woke slowly, confused at first by the softness beneath her, by the weight of the down comforter that felt like being hugged by clouds. For a moment she thought she was dreaming. Then her fingers found the bronze pin tucked under her pillow, and she remembered. Mr. Sterling, the kitchen, her mother crying, the beautiful room. It was real. Emma sat up carefully, not wanting to disturb anything in case it all vanished like morning fog. Her mother was no longer on the bed. Grace sat in the velvet armchair by the window, still wearing her maid's uniform, her head tilted back against the cushion in exhausted sleep. She had not let herself lie down in the bed. Even unconscious, even after everything, she could not quite believe she was allowed. A soft knock at the door made Emma jump. Before she could speak, the door opened a crack, and a young woman's face appeared. Carmen, one of the housemaids Emma had seen before, slipped inside pushing a silver cart. She was 19, with dark hair pulled back in a neat bun, and her eyes were wide with something between curiosity and concern. "Good morning, Miss Emma," Carmen whispered, keeping her voice low so as not to wake Grace. "Mr. Sterling sent breakfast." She wheeled the cart closer, and Emma's eyes went huge. Under silver domes were plates of scrambled eggs, still steaming, thick slices of bacon, toast with butter and jam, a bowl of bright red strawberries that looked like jewels, a small pitcher of orange juice, and a mug of hot chocolate topped with whipped cream. "This is all for us?" Emma breathed. Mr. Sterling called the kitchen himself at 6 this morning, Carmen said. She glanced nervously at the door, then leaned closer to Emma. Mrs. Thornfield was very angry about it. She told Rosa not to make it, but Rosa said she takes orders from Mr. Sterling, not from housekeepers who might not be housekeepers much longer. Emma did not understand what that meant, but she heard the warning in Carmen's voice. Miss Emma, Carmen continued, even quieter now, be careful today. Mrs. Thornfield has been asking questions about you and your mama, where you live, if you have other family. She even asked if you go to school. A cold finger of fear traced down Emma's spine. Why would she ask that? I don't know, Carmen admitted. But my abuela, she used to say that when someone asks too many questions, they are looking for ammunition. She straightened up, her voice returning to normal volume. Enjoy your breakfast, Miss Emma. The bathroom has fresh towels and soap. Mrs. Thornfield left clothes for you on the chair. After Carmen left, Emma stood looking at the cart for a long moment. Then she walked to her mother and gently shook her shoulder. Mama, wake up. There's food. Grace's eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first. When she saw Emma, saw the room around them, memory crashed back and she sat up quickly, her hand going to her chest. Oh God, she whispered. I thought I dreamed it. It's real, Mama. And look, breakfast. They ate together on the small sofa, Emma devouring everything with the enthusiasm of someone who had known real hunger. Grace eating slowly, mechanically, her mind clearly elsewhere. The hot chocolate was the best thing Emma had ever tasted. The strawberries were sweet enough to make her eyes water. When the phone on the desk rang at exactly 8 o'clock, both of them jumped. Grace picked up the receiver with a shaking hand. Hello? Mrs. Carter, a professional male voice said. This is David Thorne, Mr. Sterling's attorney. I'm calling to confirm your appointment with Dr. Benjamin Cole this morning at 9:30 at Sterling Medical Clinic. Grace's throat worked. The bill, she managed. The hospital. Paid in full as of 7:45 this morning, David said kindly. Your balance is zero. A car will be waiting at the front entrance at 9 o'clock to take you to the clinic. Mr. Sterling has arranged for Emma to remain here with the household staff while you are examined. Thank you, Grace whispered. Thank you so much. After she hung up, she sat with her hands in her lap, staring at nothing. Mama? Emma asked. We're going to be okay, Grace said, and her voice broke on the last word. Baby, I think we're going to be okay. Across the mansion in his private study, Victor Sterling sat across from Thomas Grant and listened to a report that confirmed what his instincts had been screaming since last night. Thomas was a solid man of 50 with iron gray hair and the kind of face that revealed nothing. 25 years in the FBI had taught him to present facts without emotion, to let the data speak. He laid 3 manila folders on Victor's desk. Margaret Thornfield, Thomas began, age 52. Born Margaret Volkoff in Brooklyn, 1972. Changed her name legally to Thornfield when she was 30. Around the same time, she obtained certification as a professional estate manager. Victor leaned forward. Volkov, that's Russian. Her parents were immigrants. Father died when she was young. Mother remarried. Margaret has one sibling, a younger sister named Irina Volkov. Thomas opened the first folder and slid a photograph across the desk. It showed a woman who looked like a harder, meaner version of Mrs. Thornfield, with the same sharp features but eyes that held open contempt for whoever was taking the picture. Irina Volkov, Thomas continued, currently serving 7 years at Bedford Hills Correctional Facility for financial fraud. She ran an investment scam that defrauded elderly clients of approximately $2.3 million. Convicted 18 months ago. Victor studied the photograph. And Margaret visits her? Every month, Thomas confirmed. The prison logs show Margaret Thornfield has visited her sister 11 times in the past year. Each visit requires a 4-hour round-trip drive. Gas, tolls, time off work. Conservative estimate is $3,000 annually just in travel costs. On her salary, Victor said slowly, that should not be possible. Thomas opened the second folder. This contained financial records, bank statements, credit card bills. Exactly, he said. Mrs. Thornfield earns $85,000 per year before taxes. After taxes, insurance, and her own living expenses, which include rent on a studio apartment in the city, She should have perhaps $5,000 of discretionary income annually. But she's spending $3,000 just on prison visits, Victor said, plus regular deposits to her sister's commissary account, another $2,000 annually. Thomas flipped to a highlighted page. And here's where it gets interesting. In the past 5 years, Mrs. Thornfield has made over $100,000 in unexplained deposits to a separate bank account. Small amounts, 2,000 here, 3,000 there, never enough to trigger automatic reporting, but consistent. Victor's jaw tightened. Where's the money coming from? Thomas opened the third folder. This one was thicker, filled with invoices and receipts. That's what I spent last night finding out. Sir, your household expenses have increased 43% over the past 5 years. 43%, Victor repeated. He dealt with numbers every day in his business, but this one hit differently. That's not gradual inflation. No, sir, it's not. Your monthly food costs have gone from $7,000 to $12,000. Linens and household supplies from $3,000 to $8,000. The increases are consistent across the board. And here's the pattern. Almost all of the inflated invoices come from the same vendor, a company called Prestige Home Solutions. Victor had never heard the name. Who are they? That's the problem, sir. Thomas pulled out a business registration document. They barely exist. Founded 5 years ago, no physical office location, no employees listed except the owner, no website, no public presence. But they've billed you $340,000 over 5 years. Victor felt ice forming in his stomach. Who owns the company? Thomas slid across one more document, a business registration form from the state of New York. The owner's name was highlighted in yellow. Irina Volkov. The silence in the study was absolute. Victor stared at the name. Margaret's sister, the one in prison. Thomas nodded grimly. The company was founded 6 months before Irina's arrest. My guess is Margaret helped her sister set it up as a way to funnel money. When Irina went to prison, Margaret kept it going. She's been submitting fake invoices, approving them herself, and routing the payments to the company account, then transferring smaller amounts to her personal account to avoid detection. She's been stealing from me, Victor said. His voice was very quiet. For 5 years, while I sat in this house and grieved my wife, she was building an empire on my money. There's more, sir, Thomas said carefully. I pulled your will. The one drafted 3 years ago after Mrs. Sterling passed. I remember it, Victor said. Standard stuff. Everything to Robert. Yes, sir, but there's a clause in there that I don't think you paid much attention to at the time. In the event that you die without a direct heir in residence, meaning if Robert is not living with you, which he hasn't been for 8 years, 20% of your estate is to be divided among long-term household staff, anyone employed for more than 5 years. Victor's hands had gone very still on his desk. How much is 20%? Based on current valuations, Thomas said, approximately $14 million. The number hung in the air like a guillotine blade. And who qualifies as long-term staff? Victor asked, though he already knew. Only one person currently employed has been here more than 5 years, Thomas said, Mrs. Margaret Thornfield. Victor stood up slowly and walked to the window. His garden stretched out below, meticulously maintained, beautiful and empty. He had signed that will in a fog of grief, barely reading it, trusting his attorney to handle the details. He had not cared about money then, had not cared about anything. Sir, Thomas said quietly, if you were to die tonight, Mrs. Thornfield would inherit $14 million. Victor turned around. His face was calm, but his eyes were arctic. She's not getting a penny. Find me everything, Thomas. Bank records, emails, phone logs, every invoice, every transaction. I want a case so tight that even her sister's lawyers couldn't slip through it. Yes, sir, Thomas said. He began gathering the folders. What do you want to do about Mrs. Thornfield herself? Nothing, Victor said. Not yet. I want her to think she's safe. I want her to believe I suspect nothing. He paused. But, Thomas, I want you to watch Grace and Emma. Mrs. Thornfield is going to try something. She's desperate now. Desperate people are dangerous. I'll keep someone on the house at all times, Thomas promised. After Thomas left, Victor sat alone with his thoughts. He had been a fool. He had let his grief make him blind, had handed control of his entire household to a woman he barely knew, had signed documents without reading them. He had been so lost in Eleanor's death that he had stopped paying attention to life. But that stopped last night. Last night, a hungry child with a hero's pin had reminded him what mattered. And now that he was awake, he was going to protect what was his. The Sterling Medical Clinic was nothing like the overcrowded emergency room where Grace had been taking Emma for the past 2 years. This was a place of hushed voices and soft lighting, where the receptionist knew her name before she spoke, where she was led immediately to a private examination room with comfortable chairs and watercolor paintings on the walls. Dr. Benjamin Cole was a kind-faced man in his late 50s with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses. He shook Grace's hand with both of his, a gesture that communicated care rather than professional distance. "Grace," he said gently, "Victor told me about your situation. Let's see what we can do to help." The examination took almost 2 hours. X-rays that showed the scarring in her lungs like dark clouds against pale sky. Pulmonary function tests that measured how little air she could take in. Blood work that revealed the inflammation slowly destroying her from the inside. Dr. Cole was thorough and patient, explaining everything, never rushing, treating her like a person rather than a case file. When it was done, they sat in his office, a room lined with medical texts and photographs of what Grace assumed was his family. "Grace," Dr. Cole said, folding his hands on his desk, "I'm going to be honest with you. Your condition is serious. You have pulmonary fibrosis, stage 2 progressing towards stage 3. The scarring from the smoke inhalation 4 years ago triggered an inflammatory response that hasn't stopped. If we don't intervene now, you'll be in respiratory failure within 18 to 24 months. Grace felt the words like physical blows. She had known it was bad, but hearing it spoken so plainly made it real in a way it had not been before. "What can be done?" she asked quietly. "There's a treatment protocol," Dr. Cole said. "A medication called nintedanib combined with intensive respiratory therapy. It won't reverse the scarring, but it can slow the progression significantly. In some cases, we've seen the inflammation stop entirely." He paused. "But Grace, I'm not going to sugarcoat this. You should have been hospitalized 6 months ago. Your oxygen saturation levels are dangerously low. You've been working yourself into the ground while your lungs are failing." "I didn't have a choice," Grace said. Her voice was steady. "My daughter needs me. I can't stop working, doctor." Cole's expression softened. Victor explained, "He's authorized me to start treatment immediately. The medication, the therapy sessions, everything. It's all covered. Your only job is to get well." Grace's eyes filled with tears. She had cried more in the past 12 hours than she had in the past year. "How can I ever repay him?" "He doesn't want repayment," Dr. Cole said gently. "He wants you healthy." He leaned back in his chair. "You know what he told me this morning when he called? He said he's spent 10 years in a house full of people and felt completely alone. And last night, a little girl eating leftovers reminded him what it means to be human. He said helping you is the first thing he's done in a decade that made him feel like himself again." Grace wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. "I don't understand why he cares so much. We're nobody. You're the family of a hero," Dr. Cole said. "Victor takes that seriously. His father was a veteran. He has strong feelings about how we treat the people who serve." The drive back to the Sterling mansion took 40 minutes through midday traffic. Grace sat in the back of the town car, watching the city slide past the tinted windows, trying to absorb everything that had happened. 24 hours ago, she had been terrified of losing her job. Now a billionaire had paid her medical bills and was putting her through treatment that would save her life. It felt like a fairy tale, and Grace had lived long enough to know that fairy tales always had a price. When she arrived back at the mansion, she found Emma in the kitchen with Rosa, the kind-faced cook who had been sneaking food onto the cart for months. They were making cookies, Emma's small hands covered in flour, her face bright with joy. It was such a normal scene, such a beautiful, ordinary moment, that Grace had to stop in the doorway and just watch. "Mama," Emma called when she spotted her. "Look, Rosa's teaching me to make snickerdoodles." "That's wonderful, sweetheart," Grace managed. Rosa caught her eye and gave a small nod toward the hallway. "A minute," she mouthed. Grace stepped back into the corridor, and Rosa followed, wiping her hands on her apron. "How was the doctor?" Rosa asked quietly. "He says I need treatment," Grace replied. "Mr. Sterling is covering everything." Rosa nodded, unsurprised. "That man has a good heart. He just forgot for a while." She glanced back at the kitchen, then lowered her voice. Grace, you need to be careful. Mrs. Thornfield has been asking questions all day. About where you live, about Emma's school, about whether you have family in the area. Grace felt her stomach drop. Why would she want to know that? Rosa's face was troubled. I don't know, but she's planning something. I can feel it. And whatever it is, it's not good. Before Grace could respond, another voice cut through the air like a knife. Grace Carter. Both women turned. Mrs. Thornfield stood at the end of the hallway, ramrod straight in her black uniform, her face a mask of ice. A word, if you please, Mrs. Thornfield said. It was not a request. Grace felt Rosa's hand squeeze her arm once, quickly, in support. Then she walked down the hallway to where the head housekeeper waited. Mrs. Thornfield led her to a small office off the main hall, a room Grace had never been inside before. It was spare and utilitarian, with a desk covered in ledgers and files. Mrs. Thornfield closed the door and turned to face her. I want you to understand something, Mrs. Thornfield said without preamble. Her voice was low and controlled. What happened last night was an aberration. Mr. Sterling was tired. He was not thinking clearly. He has been under significant stress recently, and I believe his judgment was impaired. Grace said nothing. She kept her face neutral, her hands clasped in front of her. This fantasy he has constructed, Mrs. Thornfield continued, where you and your daughter are some kind of honored guests, it cannot continue. You are staff. You have a position here, and that position has boundaries. Do you understand me? Mr. Sterling said I was to see Dr. Cole, Grace said quietly. He arranged my treatment. Mr. Sterling is a generous man, Mrs. Thornfield said. Her lips thinned. Perhaps too generous. It makes him vulnerable to people who would take advantage. People who see an opportunity and exploit it. The implication was clear. Grace felt anger stir beneath her fear, hot and righteous. I have never asked Mr. Sterling for anything. No? Mrs. Thornfield took a step closer. You didn't tell your daughter to put on a little show in the kitchen? To play the starving orphan? To manipulate a lonely old man with stories about war heroes? The words were so outrageous that Grace actually laughed, a short, sharp sound. My daughter was hungry because I can't afford to feed her. She was eating garbage because we are desperate. And the pin she carries belonged to my uncle, who died saving people he didn't even know. There's no manipulation. There's just truth. Mrs. Thornfield's eyes narrowed. We'll see about that. She turned to her desk and picked up a file folder. This is your personnel file, Grace. I've been reviewing it. Did you know that on your application you listed your previous address as an apartment in Queens? Yes, Grace said. We moved. When? 6 months ago when I started working here. And your daughter's school records show she transferred mid-year. Mrs. Thornfield opened the file. From a school district in Queens to one in Brooklyn. Why the move, Grace? Grace's hands tightened on each other. That's personal. Is it? Or is it because you were evicted for non-payment of rent? Mrs. Thornfield's smile was thin and sharp. You see, I made some calls today. The landlord in Queens remembers you, says you owed 4 months' rent when you left. That you disappeared in the middle of the night. We left because I couldn't wait, Grace said. Her voice shook slightly. The medical bills were too much. We moved somewhere cheaper. You moved somewhere you could barely afford, Mrs. Thornfield corrected. A basement studio with mold on the walls. Not exactly suitable for a child, is it? Some might say it's not even safe. The threat was becoming clearer now. Grace felt cold spreading through her chest. What do you want from me? Grace asked. Mrs. Thornfield set down the file. I want you to remember your place. I want you to stop filling Mr. Sterling's head with sob stories. And I want you to ensure that your daughter stays out of areas where she doesn't belong. She paused. Because if I have concerns about Emma's living situation, about her welfare, I have a responsibility to report those concerns to the appropriate authorities. Child Services takes such reports very seriously. The room seemed to tilt. Grace grabbed the edge of the desk to steady herself. You wouldn't, she whispered. Try me, Mrs. Thornfield said softly. One phone call, Grace. One anonymous tip that a child is living in an unsafe environment with a sick mother who can barely work. They'll investigate. They'll see that moldy apartment. They'll see your medical records, your inability to provide. And then they'll ask questions about whether Emma should be in foster care while you get treatment. Grace felt like she was drowning. You're threatening to take my daughter. I'm suggesting that you be very careful about your next steps, Mrs. Thornfield said. Mr. Sterling's generosity will fade. It always does. And when it does, you'll need this job more than ever. So I would advise you to accept his charity gracefully, get your medical care, and then go back to being what you are, a maid. Nothing more. She walked to the door and opened it. You're dismissed, Grace. Back to work. Grace walked out of that office on legs that felt like water. She made it to the staff bathroom before the shaking started, before the fear took over. She locked herself in a stall and pressed her hands over her mouth to keep from screaming. Mrs. Thornfield had just declared war, and Grace had no weapons to fight back with. In his study, Victor finished reading the preliminary report Thomas had sent over. The evidence was damning: invoices for food deliveries that never arrived, charges for linens that were never purchased, a paper trail that led directly to Prestige Home Solutions and from there to an account controlled by Margaret Thornfield. She had been clever, never taking too much at once, spreading it out over years, betting that he was too distracted by grief to notice. She had been right, but not anymore. Victor picked up his phone and made a call. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Sterling residence. Thomas, Victor said. How quickly can you arrange a forensic audit of the Prestige Home Solutions account? I can have someone start tomorrow morning, Thomas replied. Why, what happened? Just a feeling, Victor said. I want to know every transaction, every deposit, every withdrawal, every transfer. And Thomas, I want to know if there are any other accounts connected to it, other companies, other names. You think there's more, Thomas said. It was not a question. I think we've only found the tip of something much deeper, Victor said. And I think Mrs. Thornfield knows I'm looking, which means she's going to move soon. I'll put extra security on the house, Thomas said immediately. Do that, Victor agreed. And Thomas, keep someone on Grace and MMO at all times. Don't let them out of sight. After he hung up, Victor sat in the gathering darkness and thought about Margaret Thornfield's face last night. The fear under the anger, the desperation. A desperate animal was at its most dangerous when cornered. And he had just cornered her. But he would be ready, because this time he had something worth protecting. Two people who had reminded him what it meant to care, what it meant to fight, what it meant to be human again. He would not let them down. In the kitchen, Emma finished her last snickerdoodle and looked up at Rosa with flour on her nose. These are really good, she said happily. Rosa smiled and ruffled her hair. You're a natural baker, mija. Emma touched the bronze pin fastened to her shirt. My great-great-uncle James would have liked these cookies. Mama says he loves sweet things. I bet he would have, Rosa said softly. I bet he's proud of you right now. Emma thought about that. Do you think people in heaven can see us? Rosa's eyes were gentle. I think the people who love us never really leave. They stay right here. She touched Emma's chest over her heart. In the important place. Emma nodded seriously. Then she felt the weight of the day catch up with her. She yawned hugely. Come on, Rosa said. Let's get you upstairs before you fall asleep in the cookie dough. She took Emma's hand and led her through the mansion toward the blue room. Neither of them saw Mrs. Thornfield watching from the shadows at the top of the stairs, her face twisted with something dark and calculating. The war had begun, and the first move had been made. The confrontation came on a Tuesday afternoon, 3 days after Emma had been caught in the kitchen, 3 days after Victor Sterling's world had shifted on its axis. The mansion felt different now, charged with an electricity that hummed beneath the surface of polite routine. Grace had returned to her duties, but Victor had quietly reassigned her away from Mrs. Thornfield's direct supervision. Emma spent her days in the blue room or the library, reading books that Victor had ordered delivered, waiting for her mother to finish work. It was a fragile peace. Everyone knew it could not last. Mrs. Thornfield chose 4 o'clock to make her move. She assembled the household staff in the main drawing room, all 15 of them, their faces confused and worried. Rosa stood near the back, her arms crossed. Carmen hovered by the door, ready to run if needed. The groundskeeper, the porters, the other maids, they all gathered in the room where Mrs. Thornfield held court with the authority of a queen. Grace stood near the front, her hands clasped, her face carefully blank. She had known something was coming, had felt it building like a storm. "Mr. Sterling," Mrs. Thornfield said as Victor entered the room, "I apologize for the disruption, but I'm afraid I must report a serious incident. A theft." The word landed like a stone in still water. Victor's face showed nothing. He stood with his hands in the pockets of his suit jacket, waiting. "Two very valuable items have gone missing from the formal dining room," Mrs. Thornfield continued. Her voice was steady, almost regretful. "Georgian silver candelabras, purchased by your late wife, worth approximately $30,000 for the pair." A murmur ran through the assembled staff. $30,000 was more than most of them made in a year. "When did they go missing?" Victor asked calmly. "That's what troubles me, sir," Mrs. Thornfield said. She held a leather-bound inventory book. "According to my records, I personally inspected them on Monday morning. They were present and accounted for. Monday afternoon, Grace Carter was assigned to polish the silver in the dining room. She worked alone for approximately 2 hours. Tuesday morning, when I went to verify the work, the candelabras were gone." Every eye in the room turned to Grace. She felt the weight of their stares, felt the accusations settling on her shoulders like a yoke. "That's not possible," Grace said. Her voice came out thin. "I polished the silver on the sideboard. I never touched the candelabras. I didn't even see them." "They were on the dining table," Mrs. Thornfield said. "In plain sight. I was working on the sideboard," Grace repeated. "I finished my assigned task and left." She looked at Victor, desperation creeping into her voice. "Mr. Sterling, I swear to you, I didn't take anything." "I want to believe you, Grace," Mrs. Thornfield said, and her voice was so perfectly pitched between sorrow and duty that it might have been convincing if you did not know what lay beneath. "But the evidence is troubling. You were the only person in that room. The candelabras were there before your shift and gone after." "Then someone else must have taken them," Grace said. Her hands were shaking now. "Someone else must have been in there." Mrs. Thornfield sighed. "Sir, with your permission, I believe we should search Grace's belongings. If she's innocent, she has nothing to fear. If the items are there, we'll know for certain." Victor looked at Grace for a long moment. She met his eyes, silently begging him to believe her, to see the truth. "Search her locker," Victor said quietly. Mrs. Thornfield nodded crisply. She gestured to two of the male staff members. "Gentlemen, if you'll accompany me." They went down to the basement where the staff lockers were kept, a long row of gray metal cabinets in a windowless room that smelled of concrete and cleaning supplies. Grace's locker was third from the end, marked with a small label bearing her name. Mrs. Thornfield produced a master key. She opened the locker with a click that sounded like a trap springing shut. Inside, hanging on hooks, were Grace's spare uniform and a winter coat. On the shelf above were her purse and lunch bag. And behind them, wrapped in a canvas tote bag that Grace had never seen before, were two ornate silver candelabras, their Baroque designs catching the fluorescent light. Grace felt the floor drop out from under her. "No," she whispered. "No, I didn't. Those aren't mine. Someone put them there." Mrs. Thornfield lifted one of the candelabras carefully, handling it with a cloth. "The evidence speaks for itself," she said softly. Grace turned to Victor, her face crumpling. "Mr. Sterling, please, I swear on my daughter's life I didn't steal anything. I would never, please, you have to believe me." The other staff members were murmuring now, shock and judgment mixing in their voices. Rosa pushed forward. "This is wrong," Rosa said loudly. "Grace wouldn't do this. Someone's setting her up." "Who would do that?" Mrs. Thornfield asked, her voice reasonable. "And why?" She looked at Victor. "Sir, I take no pleasure in this, but the facts are clear. We have a valuable theft, an opportunity, and now physical evidence. I believe we have no choice but to call the police." "No," Grace said. The word was almost a sob. "Please, not the police. Think of Emma. If I'm arrested, they'll take Emma. She'll go to foster care. Please, Mrs." Thornfield's expression was one of practiced sympathy. "That's not my concern, Grace. You should have thought of your daughter before you stole." Victor had been silent through all of this, his face unreadable. Now he stepped forward. "Mrs. Thornfield," he said quietly, "when did you last polish these candelabras?" The housekeeper blinked, thrown by the question. I beg your pardon? You keep meticulous records. When were they last polished? Mrs. Thornfield consulted her inventory book. 2 weeks ago, as part of the monthly silver maintenance. And you wear gloves when polishing silver, Victor said. Correct? Of course, sir. Always. It's standard procedure to prevent tarnishing from skin oils. So your fingerprints should not be on these candelabras, Victor said. Well, Mrs. Thornfield began, I may have touched them during the inspection, but when you inspected them Monday morning, Victor interrupted. Did you wear gloves then? Mrs. Thornfield's face had gone very still. I don't recall. Perhaps not. But I don't see how. Thomas, Victor said. Thomas Grant stepped out from where he had been standing in the shadows at the back of the room. He wore latex gloves and carried a small black case. He had been there the whole time, Grace realized, waiting. Thomas opened his case and removed what looked like a handheld scanner with a small screen. He approached Mrs. Thornfield. May I? He asked, gesturing to the candelabra she still held in the cloth. Mrs. Thornfield's hand tightened on it reflexively. Then, realizing she had no choice, she set it carefully on the table beside the locker. Thomas ran the scanner over the ornate silver surface. The device beeped softly. He studied the screen, then looked at Victor. Multiple clear fingerprints, he reported, all from the same person. Grace doesn't wear gloves when she cleans, Mrs. Thornfield said quickly. That proves The prints are not Grace Carter's, Thomas said. His voice was flat, factual. I have her fingerprints on file from her employment paperwork. These don't match. The room went very quiet. Whose prints are they? Victor asked, though the ice in his voice suggested he already knew. Thomas looked directly at Mrs. Thornfield. They're yours, ma'am. Your prints are on the candelabras themselves and on the inside of Grace's locker door. The color drained from Mrs. Thornfield's face like water from a broken glass. That's impossible, she said. Her voice had lost its steady authority. I must have touched them during the inspection. In the locker, I was opening it just now. Of course, the prints on the locker door are on the inside, Thomas repeated, where you would have touched it when placing items inside, not on the outside handle. Victor took one step closer to Mrs. Thornfield. His voice was very quiet, very controlled, and absolutely merciless. You planted them, he said. You put the candelabras in Grace's locker to frame her. Sir, this is absurd. I would never. I've been watching you for 3 days, Margaret, Victor said. He used her first name like a weapon. 3 days since you threatened a 10-year-old child in my kitchen. 3 days since I started asking questions about where my money was going. Mrs. Thornfield's mouth opened and closed. For the first time in 10 years, she had no words. Thomas, Victor said, show them. Thomas reached into his case again and withdrew a thick folder. He opened it to reveal bank statements, invoices, spreadsheets covered in highlighted numbers. For the past 5 years, Thomas said, addressing the room, Mrs. Thornfield has been submitting fraudulent invoices to Mr. Sterling's household accounts. She created a shell company called Prestige Home Solutions and billed for goods and services that were never delivered. The total amount stolen is $340,000. The staff members gasped. Rosa's hand went to her mouth. Carmen looked like she might cry. Victor's eyes never left Mrs. Thornfield's face. You've been stealing from me while I grieved my wife. You built a little empire on my money, and you ruled this house with fear to protect it. And when I finally started to wake up, when I finally started to care about someone again, you tried to destroy them to keep your secrets safe. Sir, please, Mrs. Thornfield said. Her composure was cracking like ice in spring. My sister, she needed help. She was in trouble. Your sister is in prison for fraud, Victor said, which you helped fund with my money. He turned to Grace, whose face was streaked with tears of relief and shock. Grace, I apologize. This should never have happened to you. Then he turned back to Mrs. Thornfield, and his voice dropped to a temperature that could freeze blood. You have 2 choices, Margaret. 1, I call the police right now. You'll be arrested for theft and fraud. With the evidence we have, you'll go to prison for 5 to 10 years. You'll join your sister at Bedford Hills. Mrs. Thornfield's legs seemed to give out. She grabbed the locker for support. Or, Victor continued, you sign a full confession. You agree to repay every cent you stole from a structured payment plan using your bank accounts and your pension. You write a letter of apology to Grace and to every member of this staff that you bullied and terrorized. And you leave my house tonight. You take nothing but your purse. You never work as a housekeeper again. I will personally ensure that every estate manager in the tri-state area knows exactly what you did. Mrs. Thornfield was crying now, tears running down her face, her careful mask completely shattered. Please, she whispered, I have nowhere to go. You should have thought of that before you tried to frame an innocent woman, Victor said. Before you threatened a child. Before you stole from me for 5 years. He pulled a paper from the folder Thomas held. This is the confession. Sign it now or I make a phone call. You have 60 seconds to decide. Mrs. Thornfield looked around the room at the faces of the people she had ruled over with intimidation and cruelty. She saw no sympathy, only cold justice. With shaking hands, she took the pen Thomas offered and signed her name. The apology letter was worse for her than the confession. Victor made her write it by hand in the drawing room with all the staff watching. She had to detail every theft, every lie, every act of bullying. She had to name the people she had hurt and specify how. When she tried to rush through it, Victor made her start over. It took an hour. By the end, her hand was cramping and her face was blotched with tears. She read it aloud in a voice that shook with humiliation. I have abused my position of trust. I have stolen from Mr. Sterling. I have falsified records and created fraudulent invoices. I have bullied the staff under my supervision, using fear and intimidation to maintain control. I falsely accused Grace Carter of theft to protect my crimes. I threatened her daughter. I made this house a place of fear instead of a home. I am deeply, profoundly sorry. When she finished, the silence was absolute. Leave, Victor said quietly. Thomas Grant escorted Mrs. Thornfield to her room, waited while she collected only her purse, and then walked her to the front door. She paused on the threshold, looking back at the mansion that had been her kingdom. You'll regret this, she said. Her voice was small and broken, but there was still venom in it. You took everything from me. No, Victor said from where he stood in the doorway to his study. You took everything from yourself. The door closed behind her with a soft, final click. In the drawing room, the staff stood in stunned silence. Then Rosa started clapping. Slowly at first, then faster. One by one, the others joined in. They were applauding not just the departure of a tyrant, but the arrival of something they had not felt in years. Safety, justice, hope. Grace stood with her hands over her mouth, unable to process what had just happened. Emma ran to her from where she had been hiding in the hallway with Rosa, and Grace caught her daughter in her arms. It's over, Mama, Emma whispered. She's gone. Victor cleared his throat. The staff quieted. I owe all of you an apology, he said. His voice carried through the room with quiet authority. I have been absent. I have been blind. I allowed someone cruel to run my home because I was too lost in my grief to see what was happening. That changes now. He looked at each of them in turn. Effective immediately, everyone receives a 20% salary increase. You will each receive a $5,000 bonus in recognition of what you've endured. And there will be no more fear in this house. If you have a problem, you come to me. If you have a concern, you speak it. This is your home too. You deserve to feel safe here. The staff erupted into shocked gratitude. Some were crying. Rosa was beaming. Grace, Victor said. She looked up, startled. You are hereby appointed interim head of household. I need someone I trust to help me turn this house into what it should be. Someone who understands what kindness means. Will you accept? Grace stared at him. Sir, I don't know anything about running a house like this. You're not just anything, Victor interrupted gently. You're a hero who ran into a burning building. You're a mother who starved so her daughter could eat. You're exactly the kind of person I need. Will you do it? Grace looked down at Emma, who was grinning up at her with fierce pride. Then she looked back at Victor. Yes, she said. Her voice was stronger than it had been in years. Yes, I'll do it. That evening, Victor sat in his study with a glass of bourbon he did not drink, looking at Eleanor's photograph. Thomas had left an hour ago with evidence that would ensure Mrs. Thornfield faced consequences even beyond what they had imposed today. Grace was upstairs with Emma, getting settled into a larger suite of rooms, befitting her new position. The house felt different, lighter somehow, as if a shadow had been lifted. There was a soft knock at the door. "Come in," Victor called. Emma entered carrying the bronze pin carefully in both hands. She walked across the room and held it out to him. "I wanted to show you something," she said. Victor took the pin and turned it over in his hands, feeling the weight of history. "My mama told me the whole story tonight," Emma said, "about how Uncle James saved 12 people. But she said there was more to it." "More?" Victor asked. Emma nodded seriously. "The 12 people he saved, they all had families. They all went home because of him. And they had kids, and those kids had kids. Mama says there are maybe 100 people alive today because Uncle James was brave for just a few minutes." Victor felt something tighten in his chest. "She says that's what heroes do," Emma continued. "They make choices that echo, even after they're gone." Victor looked at this small girl with her serious blue eyes and her understanding beyond her years. "You're very wise, Emma. Mama says I get it from Uncle James," Emma said, "but I think I get it from her too." She looked up at him. "And from you, Grandpa Victor." The name hit him like a physical blow, warm and painful and right. "You called me Grandpa," he said softly. Emma looked uncertain. "Is that okay? I know I'm not really your granddaughter, but it feels like—" "It's more than okay," Victor said. His voice was rough. "It's perfect," Emma smiled, relieved. "Then can I ask you something, Grandpa Victor?" "Anything." "Will you teach me about my uncle? Like really teach me? About the war and the paratroopers and everything? I want to know all of it, so I can tell my kids someday." Victor thought about the boxes in his attic, his father's old uniform and medals packed away for decades. He thought about the books he could share, the museums they could visit, the history that deserved to be remembered. "I would be honored," he said. Emma hugged him impulsively, her small arms wrapping around his waist. Victor froze for just a moment, then carefully put his arms around her shoulders. It was the first time he had hugged a child in 8 years. The first time he had let himself feel this kind of simple human warmth. When Emma left, Victor picked up his phone and dialed a number he had not called in months. It rang 4 times before a familiar voice answered, cautious and surprised. "Dad?" "Robert," Victor said. His son's name felt strange and wonderful in his mouth. "I know it's late, but I need to talk to you. About everything. About why I pushed you away. About how wrong I was." There was a long pause. Then Robert said, his voice thick, "I'm listening." They talked for 2 hours. Victor apologized for the walls he had built, for the grief he had let poison their relationship, for missing birthdays and holidays and all the small moments that made up a life. Robert cried, Victor cried, and slowly, carefully, they began to build a bridge across 8 years of silence. When Victor finally hung up, it was nearly midnight. Robert was coming home for Thanksgiving in 3 weeks. He was bringing Jennifer and the kids. The Sterling mansion was going to have a real family dinner for the first time in a decade. Victor sat in the quiet dark and felt something he had not felt since Eleanor died. Peace. 3 months later, the Sterling mansion was transformed. Grace had proven to be exactly the head of household Victor needed. She ran the house with warmth instead of fear, efficiency instead of cruelty. The staff moved through their duties with smiles instead of cringing. Rosa's laughter echoed from the kitchen. Carmen sang while she cleaned. Grace herself had gained weight, her cheeks filling out, her color returning. The treatments Dr. Cole prescribed were working. Her lung function had improved by 40%. She could climb stairs without gasping. She could laugh without coughing. She was getting her life back. Emma had started at a new school, one of the best private academies in the state, on a full scholarship Victor had quietly arranged. She was thriving, making friends, bringing home report cards that made Grace cry with pride. But the biggest change was Victor himself. He was awake now, fully, completely awake. He walked through his house and knew the names of everyone who worked there. He asked about their families, their dreams, their lives. He spent evenings in the kitchen with Rosa, learning to make his mother's recipes. He sat in the library with Emma, reading her stories about paratroopers and heroes. And he had started a project. On a cold November afternoon, 1 week before Thanksgiving, Victor stood in a conference room at the Sterling Foundation headquarters with David Thorne, Dr. Cole, Thomas Grant, Grace, and Emma. Spread across the table were architectural drawings, financial projections, and mission statements. "I'm calling it the Lieutenant James Sullivan Heroes Fund," Victor said. He gestured to the documents. $10 million to start. The mission is to help families of veterans and everyday heroes who are facing medical or financial hardship. People like Grace. People who gave everything and got nothing back. Emma stood on a chair to see the drawings better. Her eyes were huge. "It's named after my uncle," she whispered. "It's named after a man who understood that being a hero isn't about glory," Victor said. "It's about sacrifice, about helping others even when it costs you everything." And he looked at Grace. "His legacy saved you and Emma. Now we're going to make sure his legacy saves hundreds more." Grace was crying, but she was smiling too. "Uncle James would love this," she said. "I want to do more," Emma said suddenly. Everyone turned to look at her. "I want to talk to people about Uncle James and about why helping is important." Victor crouched down to her level. "You want to speak publicly?" Emma nodded, clutching her bronze pin. "Mama says Uncle James's story shouldn't be forgotten. If I can help people remember, if I can help them want to be heroes too, then maybe we can help even more families." David Thorne leaned forward. "We could set up a launch event, have Emma speak about her great-great-uncle. It would be powerful." Victor looked at Grace. "What do you think?" Grace knelt beside Emma. "Sweetheart, that's a big responsibility. Speaking in front of people is hard." "I'm not afraid," Emma said. Her voice was steady. "Uncle James jumped out of an airplane into a war. I can talk to some people in a room." Victor felt his eyes burn with tears. "She has his courage," he said to Grace. "She has yours too," Grace replied softly. The launch event for the Lieutenant James Sullivan Heroes Fund took place on a Saturday in December. The Sterling Foundation Conference Center was packed with 300 people, including reporters, philanthropists, veterans organizations, and representatives from hospitals and medical charities. Victor opened the event with a speech about his father, about the values he had forgotten, about a night in his kitchen that changed everything. Then he introduced Emma. She walked onto the stage in a navy blue dress, her blonde hair pulled back, the bronze pin fastened over her heart. She looked tiny behind the podium, but her voice when she spoke carried to every corner of the room. "My great-great-uncle James Sullivan was 23 years old when he died," Emma began. She did not read from notes. She spoke from her heart. "He jumped out of an airplane in the dark over France on D-Day. A few days later, his squad got trapped by enemy soldiers. Uncle James could have hidden. He could have saved himself. But he ran out into the open so the bad guys would shoot at him instead of his friends. He gave them time to escape." The room was absolutely silent. "He was hit 7 times, Emma continued. Her voice was steady, clear. "But he kept fighting until every one of his friends was safe. 12 men lived because of him. Those 12 men went home to their families. They had children. Those children had children. My great-grandma was one of those children. My grandma, my mama, me. We're all alive because one man decided that helping others was more important than saving himself." She paused and looked out at the crowd. "That's what a hero is, not someone with superpowers or a cape, just someone who helps when it's hard, when it's scary, when it costs them something." She touched the pin on her chest. "My mama is a hero. She ran into a burning building to save people she barely knew. Her lungs got hurt and she got sick, but she never complained. She just kept working and taking care of me and trying to help others." Emma's eyes found Victor in the front row. "And Mr. Sterling became a hero too, not with a gun or by running into fire, but by seeing us, by helping us when he didn't have to, by remembering that being rich means you can help people, not just have things." She looked back at the audience. "This fund is about remembering that we can all be heroes. We can all help. And when we do, when we're brave enough to care about someone besides ourselves, we create echoes that last for generations." She held up the bronze pin so everyone could see it. "This pin is 80 years old, but what it represents, what Uncle James did, it's still alive. It's alive in my mama. in Mr. Sterling, in everyone who chooses to help instead of walking away. Her voice grew stronger. So I want to challenge everyone here. Be a hero today. Help someone. Maybe it's giving money to this fund. Maybe it's volunteering at a hospital. Maybe it's just being kind to someone who needs it. But do something, because you never know how far your kindness will echo. You never know whose life you might save. When she finished, the audience sat in stunned silence for 3 full seconds. Then they rose to their feet, applauding until the window shook. Emma stood at the podium, small and brave, and smiled. That night, after the event, after the congratulations and the donations that poured in, after the reporters left and the crowds dispersed, the Sterling household gathered for a quiet dinner. Robert had come in from California with Jennifer and the kids. Grace and Emma sat at the table not as staff but as family. Rosa served the meal she had made with love. Thomas joined them, as did Dr. Cole and David Thorne. Victor sat at the head of the table, looking around at these faces, and felt his heart so full it might burst. "Before we eat," he said, "I want to say something." The table quieted. 10 years ago, I lost my wife, and I thought I lost everything that mattered. I spent a decade in this house like a ghost, just going through motions, waiting to die. He looked at Robert. I pushed away my son. I ignored my grandchildren. I let my grief turn me into someone Eleanor wouldn't have recognized. Then, he continued, his eyes moving to Emma, a 10-year-old girl got caught eating leftovers in my kitchen, and she carried a pin that belonged to a hero, and she reminded me what it means to be human. He raised his glass. To Lieutenant James Sullivan, who I never met but who saved my life anyway. To Grace, who taught me about courage. To Emma, who taught me about hope. And to everyone at this table who helped me find my way back. They drank, they ate, they laughed. And outside the dining room windows, the first snow of winter began to fall, covering the world in quiet white. In the months that followed, the Heroes Fund helped its first 50 families. A nurse whose husband died of COVID. A firefighter with cancer. A teacher who had been paralyzed saving her students from a bus crash. Grace managed the fund with the same quiet competence she brought to everything, and her story inspired others to give. Emma became the unofficial ambassador, speaking at schools and community centers about her uncle and about everyday heroism. She never lost the pin, never stopped believing in the power of helping. Victor and Robert rebuilt their relationship one phone call, one visit, one shared memory at a time. Victor flew to California. Robert came to New York. The grandchildren spent weeks at the mansion, filling it with the noise and chaos and joy it had been missing. And every morning before anyone else was awake, Victor would go to the kitchen and make himself a cup of coffee. He would sit at the small table where he had first met Emma, and he would think about how a single moment of kindness had changed everything. 1 year to the day after that night in the kitchen, Victor hosted an anniversary dinner. Same table, same people, but so much had changed. Emma, now 11 and taller, stood up at the end of the meal. "Grandpa Victor," she said. Everyone knew to call him that now. "I made something for you." She handed him a frame. Inside was the bronze pin, Lieutenant James Sullivan's Distinguished Service Cross, mounted on blue velvet with a small plaque. The plaque read, "Courage echoes across generations, from Lieutenant James Sullivan to Grace Carter to Victor Sterling. Heroes all." Victor's hands shook as he held it. "Emma, I can't take this. This is your family's legacy. It's our family's legacy now," Emma said simply. "And your family." Victor looked at Grace, who nodded through tears. He looked at Robert, who smiled. He looked around the table at these people who had become more precious to him than all the money in the world. "Thank you," he managed to say. Then more strongly, "Thank you for saving my life." "You saved ours first," Grace said. "I think we saved each other," Emma said. "That's what families do." And in that moment, in that house that had been silent for so long, filled now with love and laughter and the echoes of everyday heroism, Victor Sterling understood the truth that had eluded him for a decade. Home was not a building. It was not wealth or possessions or status. Home was the people you helped, the people who helped you, the small acts of courage that rippled outward like stones in water, creating waves that reached shores you would never see. Home was a 10-year-old girl with a bronze pin, teaching a billionaire how to be human again. Home was this, right here, right now, and it was perfect. The end.